Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Chinese President Xi Jinping wraps up a state visit to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. China's foreign trade showed strong performance in the first 5 months, and Iran and Israel say they're halting attacks on each other. Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our first story. General Secretary Xi Jinping of the Communist Party of China Central Committee, also the Chinese president, has wrapped up a 2-day state visit to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Kim Jong-un, General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea and President of the State Affairs of the DPRK, held a farewell ceremony for the Chinese leader at the airport in Pyongyang. During talks with Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping said China and the DPRK should consolidate the foundation of political mutual trust and enhance the level of cooperation. He said a shared future and mutual support have been the defining features of bilateral relations. Xi Jinping also put forward 4 proposals on developing China-DPRK relations. Hona has more.
During the leaders' talks, Xi said the two countries should firmly safeguard their respective sovereignty, security, and development interests, and jointly maintain regional peace and development. He said the two countries should strengthen strategic coordination and cooperation. Xi also said he is ready to work with the General Secretary Kim Jong-un to keep bilateral relations advancing with the times and achieve greater progress in bilateral ties. Xi said he's willing to take the visit as an opportunity to strengthen top-level planning and strategic guidance for China-DPRK relations in the new era, adding that the parties and government's firm stance on highly valuing China-DPRK traditional friendship will not change. He said no matter how the international situation changes, the party and government's firm commitment to safeguarding the shared interest of the two countries and preserving a favorable strategic environment will not change. The two sides should maintain high-level exchanges as guidance and consolidate the foundation of political mutual trust. He also said the two countries should adhere to the goal of delivering benefits to the people and enhance the level of practical cooperation. Xi said China stands ready to work with the DPRK to strengthen the alignment of development strategies and expand practical cooperation in such areas such as economy and trade, agriculture, construction, science and technology, as well as healthcare.
That was Hona reporting. For more about China-DPRK relations, Tian Wei spoke with Zheng Jiyong, Dean of the Institute of Regional Studies and Tianjin Foreign Studies University.
Professor Zheng, this is the first overseas visit by the Chinese leader this year. This is also the 7th meeting by the Chinese leader to have with the DPRK leader. So what do you think is the important significance behind all of this?
This is
General Secretary Xi Jinping's first visit to the DPRK in 7 years, and also his first overseas trip this year, taking place at a critical moment when changes unseen in a century are happening at an accelerated pace. The international balance of power is undergoing a profound shift, and regional security dynamics are evolving in a complex way. The visit is not only a major event in the development of relations between the two parties and two countries, but also an important move in China's neighborhood diplomacy and in the strategic landscape of Northeast Asia. It should be said that top-level strategic guidance is the greatest strength of China-DPRK relations. Historically, the older generations of leaders of the two countries enjoyed close ties and deep mutual trust. In recent years, General Secretary Xi Jinping and General Secretary Kim Jong-un have held 6 meetings, maintaining close strategic communication and jointly drawing up a blueprint for the development of China-DPRK relations. With the ship of China-DPRK relations steered by the top leaders of the two sides, it will surely brave the wind and waves and sail forward with resolve. This visit also represents a continuation and deepening of that top-level strategic guidance. China stands ready to work with the DPRK to steer China-DPRK relations. From a strategic perspective, keep the bilateral relationship abreast of the times and achieve still greater development.
Professor Zheng, we have noticed in a signed article written by the Chinese president and published on Monday's DPRK press, there is one paragraph talking about the goal of this state visit. We are to, quote, discuss the traditional friendship between the two countries and exchange views on the overall development of the bilateral relations. I noticed, Professor Zheng, the friendship and bilateral relations are the two key words that has been emphasized once and again. Your thoughts on why these two words have become so important this time?
The signed article stresses that no matter how times change or how the international landscape evolves, the traditional friendship between China and the DPRK remains unbreakable and enduring, constantly demonstrating vigorous vitality. On deepening strategic communication, the article also makes clear that the two sides should uphold the fine tradition of high-level exchanges between the two parties and the two countries, and maintain close contacts like relatives. The two sides should take the 65th anniversary of the signing of the China-DPRK Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance as an opportunity, strengthen exchanges at all levels and across party, government and military institutions, implement the important consensus reached by the two sides, and add fresh impetus to the development of bilateral relations. For this reason, China and the DPRK must, going forward, further strengthen strategic coordination and remain good friends who stand together and help each other. This is precisely the historical experience and underlying significance of China-DPRK relations. In his signed article, President Xi anchors the foundations of China-DPRK relations in three dimensions. The shared socialist ideal is the defining feature of China-DPRK relations. The traditional friendship between the two countries, rooted in a shared future, forms the solid foundation of bilateral ties. And high-level strategic coordination gives China-DPRK relations their contemporary significance. In particular, this high-level strategic coordination points clearly toward a broader goal, promoting long-term peace and stability in the region, as well as world peace and stability, is a common pursuit of the two parties, the two countries, and their peoples. The two sides firmly support each other in safeguarding national sovereignty, security, and development interests, and work together to uphold regional peace and tranquility, international fairness and justice, and the post-war international order. As China and the DPRK continue to deepen strategic coordination, the two countries will surely continue along the right path of peaceful development and win-win cooperation, and jointly safeguard peace and stability in Northeast Asia. This is precisely the best expression of the contemporary significance of the relationship.
Professor, we have noticed that in the evolving world, strategic communication between and among the top leaders of the world are extremely important. And now we have also noticed that point being strengthened once again and emphasized by the Chinese leader on his way to DPRK. Strategic guidance is the greatest strength of China-DPRK relations, as reflected in the latest article. How should we understand this guidance? What kind of guidance can it provide? With that strategic guidance, what do you think can be some of the immediate goals that can be achieved, Professor?
High-level strategic communication between China and the DPRK can serve as a stabilizer at critical moments. It helps enhance communication, reduce miscalculation, and manage risks. China has always stood for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. From a strategic and long-term perspective, the two sides will continue to accurately assess the direction of developments, effectively safeguard peace and stability on the peninsula.
Earlier, the DPRK leader was in China on the occasion for marking the 80th anniversary of the victory of Chinese People's Wars of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. So how do you think this latest visit by the Chinese leader to DPRK can take another step further based on the already earlier fruitful exchanges between the two leaders?
大家都知道，2025年的9月份啊，金正恩
As everyone knows, in September 2025, Kim Jong-un visited China to attend events marking the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression in the World Anti-Fascist War. On that occasion, General Secretary Xi Jinping stressed that China and the DPRK are good neighbors, good friends, and good comrades who share a common future and stand by each other in times of need. This important formulation of the three goods reveals the historical foundation, the practical basis, and the future direction of China-DPRK relations. Good neighbors reflects the geographical bond and mutual reliance of the two countries sharing mountains and rivers. Good friends reflects a political friendship forged through arduous struggle and strengthened through sharing weal and woe. Good comrades reflect shared ideals, a shared cause, and a shared pursuit of development. At this new historical starting point, President Xi's current visit to the DPRK has further enriched the meaning of the three goods and injected fresh political momentum into the development of China-DPRK relations in the new era.
注入了新的政治动力。
Let me go to another area, Professor Zheng. In the article, a point was made about strengthened exchange and mutual learning. What kinds of mutual learning do you see that both countries are actively involved?
因为啊，现在中国正处在15的开局阶段。
China is now at the start of its 15th five-year plan period, while the 9th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea has also set out a blueprint for the country's economic and social development over the next 5 years. Although the two countries are at different stages of development, both face important tasks in improving people's livelihoods, developing the economy, and enhancing national governance capacity. By expanding cooperation in border trade, transportation, agriculture, public health, subnational exchanges, and people-to-people ties, the two sides can not only improve people's livelihoods and promote development, but also strengthen the social foundation and practical underpinning of bilateral relations.
Both countries held important political meetings in which future directions of development and its relations with the rest of the world have been drawn. So what do you think at this moment that the two sides can work on together for pragmatic cooperations?
在务实合作方面呢，
On practical cooperation, President Xi also made it clear in his signed article that the two sides should enhance the alignment of development strategies, tap the potential for cooperation in various fields, share opportunities, and promote development together so as to better benefit the two peoples. Since the beginning of 2026, there has been a steady flow of good news in rail and air connectivity between China and the DPRK. In March, international passenger train services between the two countries resumed in both directions. At the end of March, Air China also resumed passenger flights between the two countries, making people-to-people exchanges more convenient. Likewise, dozens of DPRK trading companies have already entered the border residents' mutual trade zone at Guomenwan in Dandong. At the Pyongyang Spring International Trade Fair, Chinese products have also been very well received by local consumers. In May, a new group of Chinese students arrived in Pyongyang, while DPRK delegations also took part in the 9th Asian Winter Games held in Harbin. As the two sides continue to strengthen the alignment of their development strategies and unlock the potential for cooperation in various fields, exchanges, and cooperation aimed at sharing opportunities, advancing common development, and benefiting the two peoples are becoming more prevalent than ever.
这都是中朝两国务实合作的重要的体现。
That was Zheng Zhiyong, Dean of the Institute of Regional Studies and Tianjin Foreign Studies University. This is World Today. Stay tuned. China's foreign trade rose 15.3% in the first 5 months of this year. Data from the General Administration of Customs also shows that in May alone, foreign trade expanded 16.9%, with exports up 13.8% and imports surging 21.5%. The total value of goods imports and exports reached over 4.4 trillion yuan, or over $650 billion last month. Analysts attribute the strong performance to rising global demand for Chinese high-tech products and deeper trade cooperation with partners worldwide. With more, Zhao Yang spoke with Dr. Zhou Mi, a senior research fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation.
So, Dr. Zhou Mi, thank you very much for joining us. China's foreign trade in goods rose by 15.3% year-on-year in the first 5 months of this year. And in May alone, foreign trade was up by 16.9%. What has driven the robust trade performance despite the global uncertainties?
As you said, that the uncertainty is one very important word when we're discussing about the global trade. Well, China is providing certainties on the country. So I think that is the main reason why, so many countries want to establish better connections with China. So in the past year, we have seen that the tariffs, especially from the United States, has been very unpredictable factors to tell that the world trade, all the related stakeholders to how to decide their cost of doing businesses. But at the same time, China is providing very good certainties to the world. So many countries are trying to have a better expectations by connecting with China. I think that would be the main reasons why we are seeing a very robust trade increase these first 5 months of this year.
And let's talk about trade diversification. During the first 5 months, China's trade with ASEAN increased by 16.6%, with European Union rose 10.3%, and trade with Africa grew by 18.2%. So how do you see China's positioning itself to become more resilient to future trade shocks?
Well, we know that trade is happened because that different stakeholders are requiring something from others. So they can share what they are good at and trying to buy something they are not good at. So for China, I think that first of all, we are a manufacturing country. We are not just trying to manufacture the product for China's market. We're also trying to manufacturing the products for the world. So like you mentioned, the ASEAN, the African, and also some other areas, they want to have a better industrialization. So how can they try to fulfill their commitments and make it real? I think that the integrate with China and the better supply with the intermediate products are really one important factor for them to achieve this. So we are connecting with them with a better and more certainty. I think that is definitely one very important way for us to have a more resilience. And second, I think that for China, the future means that so many possibilities about the technology development, about artificial intelligence, about the digital economies. China's manufacturing are so good at those areas. We are having more and more abilities to deal with these new products. And these new products are really important for the other countries to benefit from the development of the technology.
And we've seen China's imports grew by more than 21% in May. So how do you see this growth as global trade growth is projected to be slower this year?
It's very important. So I noticed that for the first month of this year, the trade really are, surprising me because that import of China is even higher than the export of China on the growth rate. So we know that the export growth rate is already 15% and the import growth rate is 21%. I think that means that China is really able to deal with world uncertainties by, using our market as one important factor. China is going to import more things to meet the demand of the domestic consumers. And another one, as we can find that from the government report this year, we are trying to balance our trade with our trading partners. That means we do not want only to export our things to them, but on the contrary, we are also trying to import more things from them. So at the beginning of this May, China has reduced almost all the tariff from the African countries by the import. So they can export to China in a much easier and much lower cost way. So I think that is really an important thing as we can find that the world is suffering from insufficient demand. While China is providing the demand, we are going to fill in the gaps that the world is really need from the international trade.
And China has unveiled a new regulations on outbound investment recently to push ahead the high-level opening up while safeguarding the national security and interests. So why is this needed at this moment?
Well, yeah, we know that the world is integrated in different ways. The trade, the goods, like the services, and also the capital. In the past, maybe many countries regard China as one important trading partner. They benefit from the trade with China. But I think that in the recent decade, especially, we are seeing that Chinese companies are playing more and more important role in the global, economic cooperation by investing in different countries. So can we do more to adapt to this new situation? That would be one very important question, because in the past, only several ministries like the MOFCOM, like the NDRC, has their own regulations to manage the outward investment. But many Chinese enterprises are wondering, how can we have a better understanding, especially on the coordination between the ministries? So Chinese government is trying to give a unified answer. How can we deal with outward investment? And the second, I think that it's also important because we are fearing a much more different environment, like in the host countries, because different countries are applying different strategies and policies. So as a government, I think that it's really important for us to give better information, more current information to the enterprises who really need that. We should remind them that what is happening in other country and what can we do to prepare for this kind of shock. And the third one, I would say, is also very important. That is, Chinese government are not just trying to stay there to waiting the other governments to monitor Chinese companies. We are very curious about what the other governments is doing to our enterprises. So we stand out to trying to make it better, adapting to our requirement, like for the national security. We want to make it very important information to let the other governments know that we will want to help our companies and we will support them if they are faring with some unfair practices. We will also trying to do something to tackle these problems.
And what are the most notable changes introduced by the new regulations?
In my understanding, the changes are happening in the different things. The first one is more systematical. So we are not just trying to make some sectoral or the ministerial levels of corporations. We want to do more integration about the different ministries. And we are not caring about the effects from the economic levels. I think that we are paying more the whole lifetime of the management and the services. As the government is trying to give a better support to the enterprises and trying to make it happening not just for the coming very short time, but in the longer term. So we want to make it more resilient and with introduction with some technologies and the good ideas of like the social responsibilities that the companies should do to deal with that. So it's a very wide coverage. And the second important changes is about the time. We're not just covering the pre-investment phase. We are also covering the investment phase and after investment phase. So we are having a very good expectations on all the coordination with lifetime of all the investment. It is very important.
And the rules cover cross-border transfer of technology, data, and talent in sensitive sectors. Why has this become so important issue globally? And what risk is China seeking to address?
Well, I think that these things happened only after we are introducing better technologies and the world is reforming or changing very quickly. The digital economy is able to provide us with more choices, and many companies are innovatively doing businesses with their trading partners. So by the outward investment, they are not just trying to build factories to provide the services to the local people, but also they are going to have better integrations with what they are having here in China. So in this regard, I would say that it is a kind of a new time. We are going to adapt ourselves to this new time. It's not only about the market or the enterprises businesses. It's also about what should the government do to tackle these problems.
That was Dr. Zhou Mi, a senior research fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back after a short break.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombiewski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please come to join us.
You're listening to World Today with me, Do Hongyu, in Beijing. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel could be left to fight alone if it resumes its war with Iran. He says Israel gave Washington very late notice before the first exchange of fire between Iran and Israel since April's ceasefire. Netanyahu said the fire against Iran is on hold, but warned that Israel will respond forcefully if Iran resumes its attacks. Earlier in the day, Iran announced the cessation of strikes against Israel. For more, we're joined by Dr. Tim Anderson, director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies, a Sydney-based think tank. Thank you very much for joining us, Doctor. First of all, why did Israel decide to halt its strikes against Iran at this stage? What factors may have influenced that decision?
Well, to some extent, President Trump is going to influence the Israelis because they're very keen to keep his support, or to keep his strong support, let's say. But also there's probably a natural pause where they're assessing the impact of their strikes and seeing what impact it had on the other side, both with Israel and Iran.
Despite the pause in attacks on Iran, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has said Israel will continue operations against Hezbollah. What strategic considerations are driving Israel's continued focus on Lebanon?
Well, this is really to do with the shift in strategy of the Israeli regime in recent years. It's no longer thinking of itself as a small state within certain borders, even if ill-defined borders. It's thinking of and talking about the Greater Israel Project, and it's talking about its own survival, its own self-defense in terms of the Greater Israel Project. That means annexing parts of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and so on. So it sees itself as, in a sense, fighting back against moves to eliminate the Israeli regime by expanding its borders to what has been considered in biblical terms this sort of historical heritage of the Israeli regime.
Then why did Iran choose to stop its strikes against Israel?
I think Iran is stopping to assess whether Trump has any leverage over the Israelis, whether the Israelis are going to restrain themselves at all. It's certainly not the end of the story there. The Iranians have made it very clear they are not going to have a strategic truce or ceasefire with the US so long as the Israelis are carrying out this sort of violence against their Arab neighbors and allies of Iran.
And do you see the current pause as a genuine effort to de-escalate tensions, or is it most likely to be a temporary pause before another round of confrontation?
I think it's the second, really. It's a temporary pause. None of the contradictions have really been resolved in this conflict, and the aims of the different sides are very starkly different, and really, as I said, the situation has not been resolved. The Israelis want to keep trying to weaken the resistance in Lebanon. They want to try and annex large parts of Lebanon as much as they can get away with while Trump is the president. At the same time, the Trump administration is trying to get out of its losing war in the Persian Gulf, basically find some sort of consolation prize for retreating. And at the same time, the Iranians are fighting an existential war that was imposed on them. And really, they have got rid of this idea of strategic restraint, which they had for so many years.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that now Israel is under pressure from the United States, and President Trump says he warned Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel could be left to fight alone if it resumed its war with Iran. So why did Trump issue such a warning, and what message was he trying to send?
Well, Trump is in the habit of issuing ultimatums, isn't he, to all sorts of people, including those that are regarded as his allies. But there is a difference here in terms of what they want. Trump has for some time been looking at trying to find an off-ramp from his losing war in the Persian Gulf. It's very clear. Most critical realist analysts in the US accept that the US has not achieved any of its military objectives in attacking Iran, even after they were assured by the Israelis that this would be a simple matter and the people would rise up against the Iranian regime. Entirely the opposite has happened. Yet for the part of the Israelis, whether you consider them as a separate state or whether part of the deep state of the US, still they have distinct interests. They are very happy that they got the US to be directly involved in attacking Iran, their major regional enemy, and they don't want it to stop. They would like to sabotage any type of agreement between the US and Iran, basically. And so there is this ongoing difference in objectives there, which is going to make it very difficult for Trump to find his off-ramp, and for the Israelis will keep pressuring the US, and sort of that has initiated a lot of hostility within the US state. You may have noticed that the security authorities in the US are now looking at a number of spying operations carried out by the Israelis because they've been very paranoid that the US is going to abandon them at some stage. It won't back them up in the way that it has traditionally. And so they're looking to spy on the policymakers in defense and in the Trump security establishment to see if there's going to be any significant change of position.
And if the United States were to distance itself from a renewed Israel-Iran conflict, how might that affect the strategic calculations of both the United States and Israel?
Well, it would be a very big rupture, of course, because the Israelis are at the center of what the US sees as its influence in West Asia and its domination of the region. Basically, it's been trying to dominate the region and weaken all of the Arab and Muslim states, basically. So the Israelis serve that purpose for them. But there's always been this conflict or contradiction, if you like, where the Israelis, and particularly in recent years with the Israelis, have moved into this more aggressive, more open, assertive policy of trying to expand the Israeli regime. There is really no recognized boundaries now of the Israeli regime as it's pushing its boundaries in Syria, in Lebanon, as well as in Palestine, basically. So yet the Trump administration is not happy with an ongoing long-term war. It thought it was promised by Netanyahu. Trump was promised that it was going to be a short war. It would be all over. Iran would collapse and Trump would have another feather in his cap. That hasn't happened. And so Trump has been looking for the proverbial off-ramp for some time. So these differences in strategic objectives have been opening up in recent weeks.
And now Trump also said Israel gave Washington only very late notice before the recent exchange of fire. Then how would you evaluate the level of coordination and trust between these two allies?
I mean, we have to be a little bit careful with Trump's words because what he says and what he does aren't often the same things, basically. And of course, the support of the US, including the Trump administration, for Israel has been very powerful. They continue to deliver billions of dollars and huge amounts of weapons to the Israelis to do what they're doing. So there's now no doubt there is communication and green lighting most of the operations that the Israelis are doing. But Trump is trying to assert himself a little bit because in the short term, he wants an off-ramp. He wants a way out. He wants a way to try and demonstrate that he's achieved something in the Persian Gulf and not lost comprehensively. And the Israelis have a different objective. So therefore, it must be putting a strain on their communication, their coordination.
And what are the main points of disagreement between the United States and Israel regarding the current conflict with Iran and also the regional security situation?
I mean, the ambassador Huckabee to Israel has gone publicly to support the current Israeli government's position of expanding all throughout the regions and saying effectively it's US policy to support whatever the Israelis want, because Israel has become so important to US hegemony, US domination in West Asia. And that means the US, of course, wants to exclude its major rivals. Israel has served that purpose, but on the other hand, it's created conflict and contradiction for the US government, because successive US governments have wanted to try and manage the public relations aspect of Israel, and that's become a nightmare for them in recent times with the genocide in Gaza, with the indictments by the International Criminal Court and so on. So that is really, as I say, driving this division, a fracture between the Israelis and the US, or if you like, a fracture within the US deep state.
And how might these differences between Washington and Tel Aviv affect future efforts to manage tensions with Iran and to prevent a wider regional conflict?
Well, the conflict is already widening. As you may have seen, Yemen has joined in with Iran in the mission of, it calls it a unified mission of punishing the Israelis for their crimes in Palestine and in Lebanon and against Iran, basically. So there is a widening of the conflict there. There are other possible threats that if, for example, the US followed through with any sort of ground invasion on Iran, there's a section of the Russians, the Chechens in particular, the Chechen Republic has promised to join in the ground defense of Iran and regard it as a holy war against the US invaders, So there is already significant widening of the conflict. And from Iran's point of view, as I said, it's existential, whereas from the US point of view, it was a choice that was made by the Trump administration under pressure from the Israelis. The Israelis, on the other hand, have long wanted this war with Iran, but they can't fight it themselves. They depend upon the US being there. But the US government at the moment is trying to escape because it sees that there's no real chance of success, regionally speaking, against Iran on its home ground. And now, of course, they've gifted the control of the Persian Gulf to Iran in the course of this very ill-considered war.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Tim Anderson, Director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies, a Sydney-based think tank. Coming up, an Australian expert on China's human rights approach. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
Welcome back. As officials, scholars, and representatives from nearly 100 countries, the United Nations, and other international and regional organizations gather in Beijing for a major forum on global human rights governance. We are bringing you a special series of interviews exploring how human rights governance has evolved since the UN adopted the Declaration on the Right to Development 40 years ago. In today's program, my colleague Gao Yingshi speaks with Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology. Their conversation begins with a look at how China's understanding of human rights differs from the Western approach. Powell also suggests that debates over human rights governance need to account for the growing role of digital technologies in modern societies. Let's take a listen.
So let's start with the basics. You often say that China should be understood on its own terms. So how does China define human rights differently from the West?
China has a very strong focus on ensuring that its citizens have access to a decent standard of living and access to the material resources that they need to not only live a decent life today, but to be able to deliver improving material standards of living outcomes into the future for future generations. In addition to establishing these material foundations, China also increasingly aims to deliver a holistic approach to what it is to be able to lead a good life, and this includes addressing issues to do with environment. I guess you could broadly say the spiritual or the cultural dimensions of what it means to be a citizen of a country or a member of a society. So China, I think, actually has an incredibly rich approach to this question of human rights. It takes the issue as a holistic question about what it is to be able to live a good life, not just as an individual, but just as importantly as a contributing and participating member of a community and a society. In that regard, it's actually substantially different from the narrow focus that Western human rights discourse often has, which goes to issues of what they would call political participation, for example, freedom of speech, even though it's quite clear that those ideas, when translated into practical or real context, ultimately are determined by the contexts in which they're operationalized. So there is no such ability to even talk about these things, even in terms of the West's own approach, as these sort of pure abstract ideas. So that's sort of my general take on these things.
Following from that, for Beijing, poverty alleviation and development are the foundation of its right agenda. So why does development sit at the very center of how China understands rights, and what does the West tend to miss about that?
Without food in your stomach and a roof over your head and access to education and access to health services, if you're left suffering under conditions of poverty and extreme poverty, how is it even possible to participate in the broader aspects of one's own community and society? It's not. And in fact, even in Western political discourse, certain aspects of it, certainly from an intellectual point of view, there is actually an understanding that you can't have or experience or benefit from theoretical political rights without the material foundations. I mean, how can you meaningfully have an ability to contribute to the politics, if you will, or the dialogue of your society if you are economically disempowered? And so China's own experience, of course, comes from a period in which the country as a whole was incredibly poor, suffering as it did many years of war and invasion and weak governance, together with, of course, turmoil of, warlordism, the rampant exploitation of peasants by landlords. So clearly it understands that without alleviating the material conditions of poverty, it is impossible for people to be able to meaningfully participate in social life. And so at foundation of any so-called rights agenda must be the ability to have food on the table, have a roof over your head, and have access to decent services that enable you to improve yourself, such as education, and to look after you in times of illness.
So if development is the priority, that brings us to the governance. You have been challenged the Western surveillance state narrative around China's use of technology. So how should we evaluate this without simply importing Western assumptions?
I think the first thing to say is that there's a double standard at work. And it's easy to throw around words like surveillance and point fingers at all sorts of other countries when it is also widely understood by critical analysts and critical theorists that the West itself is a social system that is subject to extensive state and, importantly, private surveillance, whether it's through technological means or other kinds of strategies. And so to accuse somebody else of being a surveillance state, I think, is a little bit rich. That's the first thing that I'll say. The second thing, of course, is that in the West itself, issues around how a government or institutions of government conceptualize and define populations and different people in populations and segments of populations so as to enable the more effective delivery of services has been part and parcel of how governing has worked for many centuries, actually. And it's important to monitor the effectiveness of policies, whether it's on health and education levels, for example, or to supervise public safety so that people can go about doing the things that they want to do, confident that they won't be subjected to either physical attack or some other kind of crime. Right? So surveillance is actually part and parcel of what modern societies, and in fact pre-modern societies, have been like. The West itself is a deeply surveilled social and economic system, and accusing China of somehow being a technology-driven surveillance environment as if the West itself isn't that, I think is a double standard. The second thing I think to bear in mind too, speaking of double standards, is that The advances in technology insofar as surveillance is concerned is actually most evident in Western technologies themselves, whether it's the emerging AI-enabled surveillance capabilities that we're now starting to see proliferate. But big data has been part and parcel of how Western corporations have actually surveilled their clients and their populations. Let's not forget that a lot of this data has been sold, on-sold and resold in Western societies for a long, long time through networks of brokers and others. So I just don't think it is helpful for these ideas to be thrown around as if somehow only one country is involved in the use of technologies for the purposes of monitoring and surveilling populations. So the double standard question is a problem. The second one, of course, is that surveillance is actually an important part, as I've implied, of effective governance, of enabling the interventions of public services to ensure that people are able to access the things that they need, whether it's healthcare or education or transportation, public safety, etc., etc. I simply don't buy this idea that somehow when the West points a finger at China and accuses it of being a techno-driven surveillance state, that somehow the West itself can lay any moral claims when it's throwing these things around. These are technologies and practices that are part and parcel of modern governance, and countries and societies across the world seeking ways of balancing the use of technologies with society's own expectations around privacy and confidentiality to achieve the right outcomes for people, empowering people to lead the lives that they want to lead, whilst at the same time creating the social environment or the public environment that makes it possible for people to do that.
That was Warwick Powell, adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology, talking to my colleague Gao Yingshi. This is World Today. Stay tuned. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is on track to become the most expensive tournament in the competition's history. Hosted jointly by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the event will feature a record 48 teams and over 100 matches. While in comparison, the previous events featured only 32 teams playing 64 matches. The competition will stretch across 39 days, making it the largest World Cup ever. Ticket prices have surged, with some official final match tickets exceeding $10,000. Industry estimates suggest the tournament could generate around $13 billion in total revenue, making it the most lucrative single sports event ever staged. For more, we're joined by Andy Mok, professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University and senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Thank you for joining us, Professor.
My pleasure.
First of all, ticket prices of the 2026 World Cup have risen sharply. What is driving the high prices?
No, you're absolutely right, Dongyu. As you mentioned, this is a World Cup with unprecedented ticket prices. One of the main reasons for this is actually their pricing model, which is called dynamic pricing. We can think of this as surge pricing, meaning that when there's a lot of demand, price goes up. And in this case, at least from the official FIFA sales channels, it can go up to a certain limit. So there is a ceiling. But this is the main mechanism why we're seeing these high prices. But there's something even more interesting here, is that there is, in fact, also a secondary market. So people can buy these tickets and then resell them. And here also FIFA is making money on this, because they also have a secondary ticket channel where they take a commission both from the buyer and the seller. And here we've seen tickets go even, not only touching $10,000 and above, but almost $40,000. So yes, the ticket prices here really are historic, and I think a very notable feature of this World Cup.
Now, the tournament is projected to generate about $13 billion in revenue. Apart from the ticket prices, what else is driving the unprecedented revenue?
Well, certainly, this is quite a money machine. The ticket sales, of course, we just talked about, But, another very, very big chunk of revenue are the broadcast rights. So here I think it's an estimated almost $4 billion. So that's also a very sizable amount. And also corporate sponsorships are very, very important as well. So the estimates are almost $3 billion for sponsorship. So this is the right to use FIFA branding, the logo, etc. And here we see also some new sponsors, including Aramco and Lenovo. So that's another important source of revenue. But corporations actually have a second way of participating as well, because these kind of events are prestige events like the American Super Bowl or golf tournaments or tennis, in that many corporations see this as a very, very important part client relationship building. So this hospitality revenue is also very important and is also at historic levels as well. This edition of the World Cup has surpassed the Qatar 2022, a full year even before the actual event. So I think this, again, is another very important source of revenue. And I mentioned the secondary market as well. So yes, this is definitely a very powerful money machine, as well as, the apex of global football or soccer, as they would say in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And building on that, what economic impact could the World Cup have on the host countries, both during the tournament and in the years that follow?
Well, there's certainly a lot of optimism about the long-term economic impact. But I think the evidence on this tends to be a little bit mixed, that it typically doesn't live up to the more optimistic projections. But at the same time, there definitely is value. And I think most of that value is reputational. So it creates greater international visibility. It helps the cities that participate market themselves, not just for future tourism, but also for future investment as well. So, greater familiarity to various target audiences can be very, very valuable.
Mm-hmm. But now some U.S. hotel managers are not that optimistic because a survey shows that hotel bookings have been lighter than expected in most of the 11 U.S. cities hosting the World Cup. Why are World Cup hotel bookings in the U.S. disappointing?
Well, so this is actually very interesting. So maybe at a macro level, this is what we can say. But if we look a little more closely at the data, there's really kind of two markets for hotels here that matches kind of the bifurcated or highly polarized economy in the United States. There's an upper 1%, that accounts for the majority of spending in the United States. And these are people who have accumulated a lot of wealth, primarily through the AI boom in the stock market, the so-called Mag 7, Magnificent 7 technology stocks. So for them, money really is no object. So they can afford to pay $40,000 for a ticket. They can afford, a five-star hotel suite to watch a game. So at the higher end, it's actually, the market is still pretty strong. But that being said, for about 80% of the hoteliers, they're below forecast. And again, I think this is evidence of this bifurcated market that we see in the United States, that, the rich are getting richer and the people that are less well off are struggling. And that struggling includes the ability to attend events like the World Cup.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Andy Mok, professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University and senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And that's all the time for this edition of World Today. A quick recap of today's headlines. Chinese President Xi Jinping has wrapped up a state visit to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and China's foreign trade showed strong performance in the first 5 months. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.